I've been playing solo Dungeons and Dragons with ChatGPT for several months now, and here's my thoughts on it. One, it's not as great as you might think. And the reason that is because the nature of how ChatGPT and all other large language models, I don't really know what I'm talking about here, works is it's trying to predict what happens next. And it takes a lot of training to have it predict what will be fun for you. It's really good at just like generic kind of stock adventures and characterizations. And you can even see it picking the same names and situations over and over again. You know, there's always goblins, things like that, bandits. However, I still really enjoy doing that. And that's because I think I've figured out 3 distinct things you can use it for. The first one is what you could do for any sort of role playing, and that is to help you come up with ideas to describe magic items and NPCs. It actually is phenomenally good at coming up with that kind of stuff. It's not so much that you take it as the final product, but you can use it as a partner to brainstorm these things up. So in my solo adventuring, I've come up with this gigantic area called the Elderwood. Of course, it's a forest, right? And I've come up with this tribe of orcs that's very non-normal for orcs, called the Lost Tribe. There's a whole backstory for it. You can go read about it if you really want to. As I was developing this idea, I would type out little fragments that I would think about during dog walks or driving around that were describing things these orcs would say, their behavior, and I would ask ChatGPT to expand on it. And then I would reply to that and have a conversation and ask them, what would it do? And then eventually you take that and you can type it up on your own, and then you can ask ChatGPT to type it up again for you. And you can see where you've got this partner to imagine things out and brainstorm it. Now, this leads to the second thing that I think is very enjoyable to do with solo role-playing. The other thing is that kind of nature of collaborative storytelling is very similar to what happens in actual role-playing, where you've got a dungeon master, a player, multiple players, whatever it may be. And if you think about it, they're all, at least in the way that I like doing role-playing, they're collaborative story playing. They're passing around the story built in the system that the dungeon master has built. And in that way, once you've developed some of these ideas and you bring a character into it, you can start to do what feels like only world building, but it really is world building by adventuring. I have a character that's a little halfling druid named Riley Feet, very creative name, but he actually has turned out to be this great scholar and scribe of this lost tribe. So there's all sorts of interactions. A lot of the adventures that he has are just going and talking with them, doing things on their behalf, developing what's going on. One of the key tools that you have with that, instead of just the back and forth that you have with ChatGPT, is someone like Rai keeps a journal of what's happening. You take on that perspective of him writing this journal, and as he goes through and writes it, you can have ChatGPT read it. And that way you're training it to predict what would happen, what this character is doing, and sometimes you even have it rewrite it. And if you just go on like a standard adventure, which you can more or less have it do, you can ask it to, on a daily basis in your game, write up a journal entry that would be there. Now, if you're using this journaling thing, one thing that I think is important to do once you've built it up is to come up with a writing style for what this person does. And what you do is you just upload that journal to ChatGPT, or you copy and paste it, and you say, comment on the style that this person has. Describe the style of writing that they have. I found that it's incredibly good at doing that. Something I experimented with, which I would like to do some more, is I would double layer that, and I would ask it to comment on the style of Rai's writing in the voice of a critic of someone else. I'm a big fan of Susan Sontag and Joan Didion, Chuck Klosterman, these kind of people. I think they're very similar in their approach. The results are much different between those three, but they have this viewpoint and this very strong way of thinking about things. So it was interesting to tell ChatGPT to write about the style of Rai in the voice of those characters, and it helped me think about, as a good critic would, who that person was and their literary presence. So if you start out with this journal entry thing, one, it's fun to write that on your own if you're into this kind of thing, which you probably are if you're doing solo role-playing. But it also gives you the ability to really work with ChatGPT and have it do something. It's also great if you want to catch it up on everything that's happening, you can just feed the journal, and it's pretty good at learning from it. That's how ChatGPT works, is you give it a tremendous amount of data and it starts to predict what would happen next and do that for you. So that journal starts to really become this kind of living document to get what you want from ChatGPT. Now, the third thing that it's not so great at, and this is really more I don't know if it's more, but it definitely is due to my unwillingness to put the time in to write the prompts to program it, is it's not very good at just standard adventuring, just going from point A to point B. I don't really like dungeon adventures. I like forest adventures. Maybe it would be great at dungeon adventures, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but you have a lot of constraints around dungeon adventures. They're a lot more mechanical. Again, in a good way, right? There's a lot more expectations about what goes on in a dungeon adventure rather than just an open-ended out in the wilds adventure. So it might be good at that, but I don't do that very much. But it can be helpful for doing just kind of stock adventures. And what you can do here is you do have to feed it a little bit, tell it the overall thing that you want. I find that a lot of the massive tables out there of just random encounters are actually pretty good. Just if you go and get like a 2-3 line description of a random encounter you have and you feed it to ChatGPT, it can come up with something interesting and fun there. If you're sort of interacting, let's say you encounter a group of, I don't know, hunters in the forest, and you're not quite sure what's going to happen in that adventure. You don't want to be quite sure. Otherwise, it's not fun. ChatGPT can go over, you've encountered these hunters and blah, blah, blah. And you can start to almost feed back into it and say, Rai is leery of the intention of these hunters, and he wants to play out and figure out what it is. And ChatGPT will pick up on what's going on there and start to also kind of imagine. Now, it's also good at taking existing adventures. If you upload that PDF or whatever you may have for your adventure, it can't really run it very well. I find that it gets off track very easily. But, at least it gives it some ideas, especially if you have something like not so much an adventure, but a write-up of an area. You see this kind of at the beginning of the Temple of Elemental Evil, where there's not really an adventure to be had in the village that you go to, whatever it's called. It's just describing the state of it. I recently used, I don't know where I found this, but I found some PDF of the Broken Coin Inn. So you can feed it this PDF of the Broken Coin Inn, and it knows about the characters, what their motivations are, what they're doing. And so when you put your character into there, you can bounce around it open-ended and just make things up. When you do have interactions that are more mechanical, that involve rolling, that involve checking things, and definitely combat, I find that you just have to do those things on your own. You can ask it for tactics, like what would this goblin do in this situation? Would it retreat or would it attack? But even that, it's not so great at. I haven't experimented that great with it. It might be good for figuring out motivations of people in situations. But I find that once you start rolling something, you're really just best to do it on your own. And in combat situations, this is actually fun because you get to play both sides of it. And I would encourage you in this situation, of course, as a player, when you're doing combat on your own, you think about clever things and fun things like that, but it's your chance to understand and do that on behalf of monsters. And let's be frank, if you just want an easy encounter for your character to have fun with, you can have your monsters be dumb. You can do whatever you want. Definitely when it comes to combat and the more mechanical things, I find that ChatGPT is just not very good. I think if I was better at Python or scripts, you could come up with a set of scripts that would really help out there. You can see this in one of the most recent academic papers where they use ChatGPT with a bunch of Python scripts in a Discord server to automate those more mechanical things. The thing there is I don't think ChatGPT is very good at mechanics, at deterministic play, at even coming up with random numbers. So that if you find that you want it to follow rules, that's not really where it functions. And definitely if you ask it to roll dice, don't do that. Just use actual random number generators. You can just go to Google and type in D10 and it will roll a D10 for you with a little animation. Or you can roll your own dice, whatever you want. Now with a lot of this, and this is more or less the case with solo role-playing, unless you're just completely going bonkers with random Oracle stuff. But even if you're doing that, you still end up knowing what's going on, things that you shouldn't know as a player. That's just something that you have to put up with. I would think about how you can use that to your advantage, right? How you can use it to, as they say, have the theater of the mind going on. What I find very interesting, to that end, somewhat ironically, I think one of the best ways to use ChatGPT to help you with your solo adventuring is when you're not using it. So you're working out the structure of things, the setting, the world building, even the actions that are happening with the characters, their kind of evolution. But then when you're away from it, when you're, as I frequently am doing, walking the dog, staring into nothing, you're really given that foundation, that system that a dungeon master would give you to just imagine things out and play things out in your head. If you're like me and that's something that you do a lot. You can can use ChatGPT to help you have that system, that foundation for things that actually allows you to focus on the more imaginative things in your theater of the mind or whatever. The things that I wish I could do better with this is I am constantly trying to figure out not only better prompts. I have some prompts that I use and I've made them into little GPTs, but I don't feel like they're that great. And oddly enough, I don't know why this is, but if you go search around for prompts, they disappear after March of this year. I think maybe people who came up with good prompts are trying to commercialize them instead of sharing them. It's especially annoying when you go look at images people have generated and they don't give you the prompt for generating that image. That's pretty absurd, but whatever. I guess it's better to share than not to share. I haven't really gotten that good nor tried a lot to perfect the prompts, and that's because it's not playing. I have some prompts that I use, which I'll share if you click on one of the links below, but I think things could be a lot better with it. Related to that, as I alluded to earlier, is I think there's a lot better training that I could do for it. And what I mean by that is I could probably come up with, I don't know, probably 3 or 5, some odd number above 1, 3 or 5 sort of scenarios, plays, interaction that has back and forth that I could feed to ChatGPT and say, this is the style of play that I want. These are the things that I would like you to do. And again, you can think about that as training it, setting its expectations for what it should be doing. So I don't know, maybe when I have more spare time, I'll do that. But until then, I think it's good enough to just use the basic prompts that I have with that kind of approach that I went over of thinking about an ongoing journal that you have, more having an expectation of co-storytelling,